Okay, hello everybody and welcome to Doc Brown's Radio Lab. We have a new video for you today. We are going to be servicing this probably 1970s Marvin electric window fan. This fan is all metal and I have already taken all the screws out except for one. So we are going to begin the disassembly of this fan. I have already taken off the motor covers. Say Marvin on them, they go on each motor. So I'm going to start by removing the last screw. And we'll get this disassembled, and then off camera I'm going to wash all these parts off, and then we'll get to the actual electric motor rebuild. Now, the purpose of this is going to be a good philosophy to keep things out of the landfill. We are fixing old equipment, old things like this, to give them new life again, and at the same time by keeping waste out of the landfill. I've had this fan it's been in our house for probably 20 years. The last 15 or so years it's been sitting out in the garage. Hasn't been used, so I figured today would be a good day to go ahead and clean this fan up, rebuild it, oil the motors, and put this fan back into service. So we're going to get started. Now the exterior frame is a little bit bent, but that's okay. I can probably bend that back. Go ahead and remove this piece. This is our plastic housing. I already took the switch covers off. I'm going to remove this inner grill. And then I am going to lay this piece down while I flip it over. And remove the front piece. A little broken piece right here, but that can be fixed. Now I'm going to remove the front grill. And now it gets to the motor blades. Now, for a little while, I actually struggled. There's the switch cover, by the way, a little shroud that goes over the switch. I actually struggled a little bit at first with getting these blades off, because you normally think, okay, that's probably just a set screw you take out. But there's actually a rubber bush that goes between the blade and the motor shaft, and it actually holds the blades on. So I already pre-soaked these with WD-40 and was able to get them to remove. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of forward pressure on each blade, and they just pop off along with the grommet that goes on. Just like that, they come off. And now we are left with both of our shaded pole electric motors. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera at this point, and I'm going to clean the blades and the plastic pieces that I have taken off the front and dry them, and then we'll be back to begin servicing the electric motors. So this is something that anybody can do at home. It shouldn't take you very long at all to service one of these shaded pole motors. They just come apart really easy. And then I like to use 3-in-1 electric motor oil to lubricate each bush or sleeve bearing on the motor. So I will be right back when the parts are cleaned, and we will continue. I hope you enjoy. Okay, welcome to the next part of this video. What I have done is I have taken the 4 bolts off that hold the motor to the frame, and I have taken all those parts outside to wash them out and let them dry. And while they are drying outside, we are going to go ahead and rebuild the 2 motors. So, real quick, I gotta grab my paper towel here, because I'm gonna wipe down this piece as well. Because I did not want to take it all the way off because of the power cord that's going to our switch right here. So here's our switch. All the electrical components are part of this assembly. Guess I can take out our other switch cover. And our attention needs to go to both of these shaded pole electric motors. The motors do turn freely, but we are going to clean and lubricate them, just like I would a regular desk fan motor. So I'm just doing a gentle wipe down of all the components with a damp rag. Not too damp though. I hope that everything I'm doing is in frame. So we're just giving them a gentle wipe down. Because these motors are probably from the 70s and have never been cleaned or serviced that I know of. So, how do you service one of these motors, you often ask? Well, they're pretty easy to service. The first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and remove the bolts on the back. Now the size to take the nuts off the motor brackets, they were 5/16, but I need to find the size for these rear bolts on the motor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it is looks like a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to get my 1/4 inch socket. And I hope you all can see that. Let me just make sure. Yep. Okay. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and dismantle these motors. Very easy to work on, just like I did my last electric motor rebuild on my fan, which I didn't actually show on camera. But next time I will be sure to do so. So these bolts, they loosen and then they should pull all the way through, I would imagine. Unless they might be two separate bolts. One for the front and one for the rear. Keep my nuts together so I don't lose them. No one wants to lose their nuts. And they are through bolts. As they see, they go all the way through the motor. So in order to disassemble this motor, we have to take out both of them. And once again, this is going to help prolong the life of these fans by rebuilding these motors. And at the same time, you're saving a piece of history from being in the landfill, where you can easily go out and buy a new fan, which won't be as well made or as easy to service as these old fans are. So, once both through bolts are out, which they are, the motor will now come apart. So, I will show you the different components of one of these motors and what's important when you're actually rebuilding these. Okay. So, the components to a shaded pole motor are as follows. We have the rotor. This is the part that actually spins inside the motor and what your fan blade will attach to on the shaft. That's called the rotor. And then we have the stator assembly, which is magnetically coupled to this coil. This coil is what receives 120 volts power, and you have these two bars, copper bars, which are your shaded poles. And they are what start the magnetic field and give the rotor the initial kit that it needs to begin spinning. Similarly to a transformer, you have a wound coil surrounded by an iron core, and instead of a secondary winding of the transformer, think of this as a secondary winding. The rotor is going to spin in response to that magnetic field. So, what we do to actually service one of these is these are our bearing brackets. I like to call them bearing brackets. They are end plates. So these are our bushes that have our bearings, or our brass bushes in them. And the important thing with one of these motors is you have to clean and oil these bushes. These are what prolong the life of the motor by giving them lubrication. And there is a felt lining. I'm just looking at the bushing here for a moment off camera. These bushings have felt inside of them, which the felt is designed to soak up the lubrication and spread it along the raceway of the copper bush as the motor is running. It's going to soak in the oil and it's going to distribute it to that bush. So, once everything's been cleaned out, we are going to apply some oil to the bearings. And then I believe there is a little hole here which will allow us to oil that felt pad, which is inside there, which again, that felt pad is going to be what actually deposits the oil into the bushing. I believe that's what that hole there is for you to saturate that felt pad which sits underneath. And underneath this cover here, that is what actually will lubricate the bushing. So we need to do that for both sides. And then we can reassemble and repeat the process for the other motor. Now the other thing you can do is you got to clean up the rotor and just get any old oil or gunk off of there. And the other thing you want to be mindful of when servicing one of these motors is there's going to be a little shim washer. Sometimes they're on both sides, sometimes they're only on one side. This one has shims on each side. You don't want to lose those, because that is shim so that the motor doesn't have any end-to-end play in the bearing after it's all together. So you want to make sure you don't lose those washers that are in there. A lot of times they're cardboard or felt washers, so you don't want to lose that. So now that these have been cleaned, what I am going to do is just clean off my work area a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and take our 3-in-1 electric motor oil, and we're going to lubricate these bushes. Now, like I said, I believe in there is going to be our felt material that we want to lubricate. So we want to go ahead and put some oil down there, and that should start to soak into that felt pad. So we just kind of want to fill that up real good, and we should start to see it come in here. But I'm also going to lube the bushing this way. And just get that nice and lubricated inside the felt. And as you can see, it's soaking in. So you want to do this a few times to ensure that that felt is nice and soaked, because that's what's going to provide your long-term lubrication to each bushing. So I'm just saturating that felt. You don't want to put too much, but you want to put enough to get the oil where it needs to be, which is in the bushing. And I'm just doing a quick inspection of that bushing. And of course I'm going to clean excess oil off of it before reassembly. Just going to do a little more in there, just to ensure we get as much oil as possible into that felt. That's really what you want to soak with oil, especially since these have been dry for so many years. Alright, I think that one's pretty well saturated, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same to this one, and then we're going to clean them before we reassemble so that we get the excess oil off. So again, this is just a slow process. You just want to be patient. And just saturate the bushings. Saturate your felt pad. And of course, what we are doing is we are ensuring that the felt pad gets soaked with enough oil to provide prolonged lubrication to our motor. Okay, that looks pretty good. So, what I'm going to do now is I will be right back, and I'm going to go ahead and get another rag so we can clean up these bushes and get our motor put back together. So bear with me one moment, please, and I will go ahead and do that. Okay, I am back now. I got a nice microfiber cloth so that we can go ahead and clean these up to get the excess oil off of the back of the bushing, because while it's important to lubricate the bushing, it's also very important that you try to leave as little excess oil as you have to on the exterior of the bearing. And the reason for that is that the excess oil will attract dust and dirt right to where you don't want it to be, which is inside your motor. Now the other thing I have noticed is, of course, you have to make sure which bearing you put on where. The front bearing where the shaft goes through has a hole in it for the shaft to pass through, while the rear bearing does not. It's sealed so that you keep dirt and dust out of it, but you still have your lubrication hole. So, everything looks pretty good. Our bearings look oiled enough. And we are ready for reassembly of this motor. So real quick, I'm just going to put a drop of oil on the shaft. One on each side there where it's going to contact the bearing. Just so we have a little bit of lubrication ready to go. Now once again, I'm taking the time, of course, to clean our motor. Assembly. And we can go ahead and begin the reassembly process. So, I'm going to take the rear bearing. And the other thing to consider, of course, too, is that the front of the motor is going to be like this one where the text is. So we got to make sure we orient it correctly. So that means that the rear bushing is going to go in this way. Just like that. I'll keep my finger on the back so that I hold it in place. And I'm actually going to flip it so that the oil port is on the top. That way we keep in mind we're able to oil the bushing like that. So now I am going to drop the stator, or excuse me, the rotor in place, down into that bushing, just like that. Make sure it turns freely. And then I am going to take our top bushing and I am going to insert the shaft. Just like this, and I am going to place it back onto the motor, just like so. So once our bushing is through, now we can take our end bolts and go ahead and feed them through to the top of the motor, and that is going to hold our assembly together for us. Now sometimes it can be difficult to get these to want to line up, so you have to make sure when you're going to put them in that you actually get them in there lined up all the way and threaded through. And then when it's done correctly, you should see your threads start to come out the top, just like that. And I like to kind of do these evenly so that each side gets pushed correctly where it needs to be in place so that you don't have any alignment issues later on. And there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down. Now they're not going to tighten, mind you, because remember our top nuts that actually secure the motors in place are what will also hold them in. You know, the top parts aren't going to tighten in, but the bottom ones will tighten into the threads. Just like that. Gentle turn. Okay. And just like that, we have rebuilt our motor. As you can see, it turns nice and freely now. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just put a little bit more oil in those in those felt pads. A couple drops in each one, just to ensure we get enough oil in there. And our first electric motor has been successfully rebuilt. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera while I rebuild our second electric motor. And then once our motors are rebuilt, I'm going to go ahead and show you how we reassemble the fan. So, I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera, and then I will continue in a moment. Thank you very much for watching. Alright, welcome to the final part of this video. We are going to get the motors that have been freshly oiled and serviced remounted back into the frame. So we have to take our nut driver and we have to switch back to our 5/16 socket. And we take our nuts and all we do is we just line the motors up back in the brackets as follows, and then we just put our nuts on. And that is what secures our motor to the fan assembly. There we go. And like I said, off camera, I rebuilt the second motor. For the sake of time, I just wanted to show you how we rebuild one motor, but we did the exact same thing for the second motor. We took the two bolts out that hold the two halves of the motor together. We split the rotor out of the two bearing brackets. We cleaned both bearing brackets and we oiled the felt pads in both bearing brackets as well as the bearings themselves to provide lubrication. And then once we were sure that each bearing was lubricated properly, we then reassembled the motor. So what I'm doing right now is I am resecuring the motors to their brackets. You don't want to over tighten, but you want to tighten enough that they'll be secure. Just like that. Verify our motors turn nice and freely. Okay. The next step will be to flip the assembly over, and we are going to get our switch mounted back in the front panel. There are two pads on the switch that we have to get lined up. In order for the switch to be resecured to the front. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, so that's why I'm kind of moving around. I apologize about not being in frame for this. One side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the back to the other side. Once again, I apologize for this. It's just easier to do it when you can really get in there and see without being limited by your frames. Sure we get both pads firmly in place to hold our switch in. sometimes these can be a little bit tricky. Getting them lined up so that the plastic clips will go back in. Almost got it. Alright, I will get back to you. I'm going to pause the video and I'll get back to you when I get the switch put in. Okay, welcome to the last part of this video. We're getting closer to final assembly at this point. The next step is going to be, I already put the rear cover on, the rear cage, and both switch covers on each side. So the next part is going to be dealing with our blades. Now these blades are a little bit bent from, in relationship to each other, but I want to get them as straight as possible so they're not going to hit anything. So I'll probably have to adjust them a little bit, but I want to get them put back on our motors. So, if you want the pitch, to be the right way. So, let's see if I can go ahead and get these on. Back on our motor. Excuse for being off frame. You don't want them to hit anything. That's why you got to be careful when you put these on here that they're not going to hit. Especially when the fan is upright like this. Because these just press on. Just got to be mindful of your blades and adjusting the pitch as needed. Sure they're not going to hit. And you can see how well our motors turn now. Hopefully you can see that. So I got the switch mounted back in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn it this way. And we're going to go ahead and now our switch cover had two plastic pegs that are broken off. So it's not really going to stay on there very well, but I mean it should stay on there enough to still let everything go together. Now the other thing with this is of course making sure that this cover is not going to hit our blades when our cover goes back on there. That's the other thing with this, that say it's going to hit these blades, so you can't, this can't be bent, but our blades also can't be bent forward too much. So it's going to be a little bit of an experiment to get them all where they're lined up correctly, so they don't hit. Because that's going to be one of the issues, is of course if it hits this outer screen. So you really don't want it to. You want these to be down enough. See, it's going to hit. Figure out where it's hitting, why it's hitting, and get it so they're straight. See, I'd still prefer them to be straighter than that, but man, it's hard to do. I understand this fan's a little beat, but you know how easy them can hit on there? So you really don't want that at all. So it's just kind of a matter of lining everything up correctly. And then you can kind of look at it to see if those blades will clear the front cage when you go to put everything together. Sure everything's clear here and on straight. Still hitting a little bit over here. Maybe sometimes you just gotta bend them right. But I don't want the blades to be too out of adjustment. But you don't want them to be too forward either on there. This is kind of the hard part. Just making sure they're not going to hit. So I think I can go ahead and get the screws started. Put it back together. Trying to line them up. That also is a difficult thing to do. Hopefully I can kind of start one and then the others will come along. Yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to do. Alright, here's the deal. I'm going to come back when I get this put together. Okay everybody, last part of the video. That took a little bit of maneuvering to get all that back together again, but I finally got it. And you know what? That shows that sometimes stuff can be a little bit tough in life, but you got to just keep going until you get it done right. So we have a fully working window fan. There we go. I tested it on both speeds, so yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. That is just showing a quick way of how you can resurrect something again from being thrown out and get more use out of it. You know, help save our environment. Keep these old things running and keep them reliable and enjoy them, rather than throwing them out and going and buy a new piece of equipment. So thank you guys very much for watching through this video, and I really hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more electronics, repairs, fire alarm related content, and other things to come in the future. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everybody.